The Volanthi Trade Summit was the largest gathering of spacefaring species in the entire Orion Arm. Every year, representatives from 12 different civilizations came together at Station Meridian. The massive orbital platform floated in neutral space far from any single species' territory. It was supposed to be a place of peace and cooperation. But this year, the air inside the Grand Assembly Hall felt heavy with tension. Ambassador Ilan Marasova stood near the back of the human delegation section. She was a tall woman with gray streaks in her dark hair and calm eyes that revealed nothing of her thoughts. Humanity had joined the galactic community only 40 years ago. In the eyes of the older species, humans were still newcomers. They were considered industrious, but unremarkable. Tolerated, but not respected. A minor power that posed no threat and offered little influence. Yellen had grown used to the dismissive glances from other ambassadors. She had learned to smile politely when they spoke over her or forgot to include humanity in important discussions. But today, she was not thinking about respect or recognition. Today, she was watching the Krethax delegation very carefully. The Krethax were a reptilian species. With scaled skin that ranged from deep green to black, they stood taller than most other beings in the room, and they carried themselves with the confidence of predators. Their empire had been expanding aggressively for the past century. They did not conquer through open warfare. That would be too crude. Instead, they used economic pressure, political manipulation, and the constant threat of their massive military fleet. Smaller species either joined the Dominion willingly or found themselves surrounded and starving until they had no choice. Warlord Merchant Thrax led the Krethax delegation. He was enormous, even by the standards of his own kind. With ceremonial scars marking his face, and golden rings pierced through the ridges above his eyes. When he walked to the center of the assembly hall, every conversation stopped. Every eye turned to him. Thrax smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. The Krethax Dominion announces its intention to claim protective rights over the Fenari systems, he declared. His voice was deep and carried easily across the silent hall. The 3 worlds and their inhabitants will now fall under our guidance and protection. Any objection to this claim will be considered an act of hostility against the Dominion. A ripple of shock passed through the assembled delegates. The Fenari were a gentle species. They were small beings with soft fur and large eyes, known throughout the galaxy for their agricultural expertise and peaceful nature. They had no military. They had no weapons. They had simply existed quietly on their 3 green worlds, harming no one and asking nothing from the greater powers around them. The Fenari ambassador, elderly female named Tessara, rose from her seat. Her voice trembled as she spoke. We have done nothing to provoke this claim. Our worlds are our own. We ask only to be left in peace. Thrax turned to look at her. His smile widened. Peace is a privilege granted by the strong to the weak. You have no strength. Therefore, you have no right to make demands. Several other ambassadors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The representative from the Villani Collective cleared his throat and spoke up. This is highly irregular. The Fenari systems are recognized as independent territory under the Meridian Accords. The Meridian Accords are suggestions, Thrax replied. Nothing more. If you wish to challenge our claim, you are welcome to do so. Our fleet of 200 warships is already traveling to the Fenari border. They will arrive in 3 days. He paused and looked around the room slowly. Does anyone here command a fleet capable of stopping them? Silence. Heavy, defeated silence. The Villani representative sat back down. The ambassador from the Tirani Federation looked away. One by one, every species in that room made the same calculation. The Krethax were too powerful. Their fleet was too large. No single civilization present could match them in open combat, and none trusted the others enough to form an alliance. Yellen Marasova watched all of this with her calm, unreadable expression. She saw the Fenari ambassador beginning to weep silently. She saw the satisfaction spreading across Thrax's scarred face. She saw the other delegations accepting the inevitable. Already preparing to pretend this, injustice was not happening. Then she quietly excused herself from the assembly hall. she walked through the curved corridors of Station Meridian until she reached a private communication room reserved for the human delegation. She sealed the door behind her and activated a secure channel. The encryption protocols she used were not standard diplomatic codes. They were something much older and much more secret. A voice answered. No image appeared on the screen. Just a voice, calm and professional. Ambassador Marasova. What is your assessment? The situation has developed as we predicted, Yellen said. The Krothaks are making their move on the Fenari. No other power will intervene. The summit will formally accept the annexation within the week. There was a pause. Then the voice asked, Your recommendation? Yellen thought about the Fenari ambassador's tears. She thought about Thrax's arrogant smile. She thought about 40 years of humanity being dismissed and ignored while they worked in secret. Building something that no one in this galaxy had ever seen before. Activate Protocol Shepherd's Watch, she said. Another pause. Longer this time. When the voice spoke again, there was something new in its tone. Something that might have been anticipation. Understood. The Prometheus will launch within 6 hours. Estimated arrival at Station Meridian, 3 days. The channel closed. Yellen stood alone in the quiet room for a long moment. Then she allowed herself a small smile. The galaxy thought they knew what humanity was. They thought humans were a minor species with limited technology and no real power. They had no idea what humanity had been building in the darkness between stars. They had no idea what was coming. Yellen returned to the assembly hall. She took her seat and folded her hands in her lap. When other ambassadors glanced at her, they saw only the same calm, unremarkable human they had always seen. They assumed she had accepted the situation like everyone else. They could not have been more wrong, far away. In a hidden shipyard buried deep within an asteroid field that appeared on no official maps, lights began to activate. Engineers who had spent their entire careers on a single project ran final checks on systems that had never been tested in actual combat. Pilots who had trained for years in perfect secrecy took their positions. And in the main hangar, a vessel that had never left its construction dock began to wake up. It was 3 kilometers long. Its hull was thick and angular, designed with no consideration for beauty or elegance. Every line and curve served a single purpose. It looked industrial. It looked brutal. It looked like something built not to explore or trade, but to end arguments permanently. The name painted on its side was simple. Use Prometheus in 3 days. The galaxy would learn what humanity was truly capable of, and nothing would ever be the same again. Their first look at a human warship, and every alien vessel immediately halted part to 3 days passed, slowly at Station Meridian. The atmosphere in the diplomatic halls grew heavier with each passing hour. Representatives from the various species went through the motions of discussion and negotiation. But everyone knew the truth. They were simply waiting for the Kriox fleet to arrive and make everything official. The Fenari delegation had stopped attending sessions. Ambassador Tessera remained in her quarters, preparing messages to send to her homeworld. Messages that would tell her people to cooperate with their new masters. Messages that broke her heart to write. Ambassador Yellen Marasova continued her work as if nothing unusual was happening. She attended meetings. She smiled politely. She made small talk with delegates who barely acknowledged her existence. If anyone had been paying close attention to her, they might have noticed that she checked her personal communicator more often than usual. But no one was paying attention to the human ambassador. Humanity was irrelevant to what was about to happen. On the morning of the 3rd day, alarms began sounding throughout Station Meridian. Hyperspace signatures had been detected. The Krothax fleet was arriving. Delegates rushed to the main observation deck, a massive curved window that offered a panoramic view of the space around the station. They watched as points of light began appearing in the darkness. One by one, Krothax warships emerged from hyperspace. 10 ships, then 20, then 50. They kept coming until the void was filled with the angular, predatory shapes of the Dominion's military might. 200 warships ranged themselves in perfect formation around Station Meridian. Their weapons were visible even from this distance. massive cannons capable of reducing cities to ash, missile bays loaded with enough firepower to crack open moons, shield generators that could withstand bombardment from entire planetary defense networks. Warlord Merchant Thrax stood at the center of the observation deck, his arms folded across his broad chest. His smile had not faded in 3 days. If anything, it had grown wider. "Citizens of the galactic community," he announced, his voice carrying across the crowded deck, "you now see the reality of power in this region of space. The Krathek's Dominion offers one final opportunity for any who wish to formally object to our claim on the Fenari systems. Speak now, or accept our authority." Silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Thrax nodded slowly. "Then, it is decided. The Fenari systems are now hyperspace signature detected." A calm electronic voice interrupted. It was the station's automated sensor system. "Unknown vessel approaching." Thrax frowned. He turned to one of his officers. "Reinforcements?" "I did not order additional ships." The officer checked his scanner and his scales went pale. "Sir, the signature does not match our fleet profiles. It does not match any known Krathax vessel." He paused, his clawed fingers trembling slightly. "In fact, sir, it does not match any vessel in our database at all." Every delegate on the observation deck turned to look out the window. A new point of light was forming in the distance, brighter and larger than any of the Kreothax arrivals. The light grew and expanded until it seemed to tear a hole in the fabric of space. Itself, then, something emerged. The first thing anyone noticed was the size. The ship that dropped out of hyperspace was 3 kilometers long. That was not unprecedented. The Krathax flagship measured 4 kilometers from bow to stern. But there was something about this vessel's proportions that made it seem larger, heavier, more solid. The second thing they noticed was the design. Alien warships were built according to certain principles. The Krathax favored aggressive angles and visible weaponry. The Villani preferred smooth curves and elegant lines. The Terrani built their ships to look like predatory sea creatures from their ocean homeworld. Every species had their own style, their own aesthetic. This ship had no style. It had no elegance. It had no beauty. It was a block of metal and purpose. Its hull was thick and armored with no consideration for appearance. Its surface was covered with panels and ports whose functions were not immediately clear. It looked industrial. It looked like something built in a factory, not designed by artists or architects. It looked like humans had constructed it with only one question in mind. Will this work? The ship came to a stop between Station Meridian and the Krathax fleet. It simply hung there in the void, silent and still. For a long moment, nobody moved. The Krathax officers stared at their sensors, trying to make sense of readings that contradicted everything they knew about spacecraft engineering. The other delegates stared through the window, frozen by an instinct they could not name. Then the name on the ship's hull became visible as it rotated slightly toward the station. U.S. Prometheus. United Earth ship. Human, someone whispered. That is a human ship. Thrax's smile finally disappeared. He turned to look at Ambassador Marisova, who stood calmly at the edge of the observation deck. Her expression had not changed. She was still wearing that same polite, unremarkable mask she had worn for the entire summit. "Ambassador," Thrax said slowly, "would you care to explain what your people think they are doing?" Before Yellen could respond, a communication signal activated across all channels. A human voice filled the observation deck. It was female, calm, and professional. "This is Captain Helena Vance of the United Earth Confederation vessel Prometheus. We are responding to a formal request from the human diplomatic mission at Station Meridian." There was a pause. "The United Earth Confederation formally objects to the proposed annexation of the Fenari systems. We request immediate discussions regarding alternative arrangements." Thrax stared at the window. At the ship, at the tiny human ambassador who was still watching him with those calm, unreadable eyes. Around him his fleet waited for orders. 200 warships against 1. The mathematics were simple. The outcome should be obvious, but none of his ships were moving. None of his captains were reporting ready status. The entire Krathax fleet hung motionless in space. and Thrax slowly realized why. They were afraid. He could see it in the faces of his officers. He could hear it in the silence on the communication channels. Something about that human ship had triggered an ancient warning deep in the minds of every being present. A warning that had kept their ancestors alive in dangerous times. A warning that whispered, "This is a predator. This is death. Do not move." Thrax had not felt fear in decades. He was feeling it now. The question was, what would he do about it? Their first look at a human warship, and every alien vessel immediately halted. Part 3 Warlord Merchant Thrax had built his entire career on one simple principle: never show weakness. Weakness invited challenges. Weakness invited enemies. In the brutal politics of the Krythox Dominion, a leader who showed fear was a leader who would soon be replaced. So when the initial shock of the human ship's arrival began to fade, Thrax did what he had always done. He pushed through his fear with anger. "One ship," he growled, loud enough for everyone on the observation deck to hear. "The humans send one ship against 200, and they expect us to negotiate." He laughed. The sound was harsh and forced, but it served its purpose. His officers began to straighten up. Some of them even managed to smile. "This is not courage. This is stupidity." Turned to face the window directly, staring at the distant shape of the Prometheus. Then he activated his fleet-wide communication channel. "All Krythax vessels, target the human ship. Maximum weapons charge. We will show these newcomers what happens when lesser species forget their place." Across the void, 200 warships began powering their weapons. Energy gathered in cannon barrels. Missile bays hummed as targeting systems locked onto the Prometheus. Shield generators activated at full strength, preparing for any possible counterattack. On the observation deck, the other delegates watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. Several of them glanced at Ambassador Marisova, expecting to see panic or despair on her face. Instead, they saw something that confused them deeply. She was smiling, just slightly, as if she knew something they did not. The Prometheus did not move. It did not raise shields. It did not power weapons. It simply floated there in the darkness, silent and still, waiting. "Sir," one of Thrax's officers said nervously, "the human vessel is not responding to our targeting locks. They are not taking any defensive action." "Then they are fools," Thrax replied. "All ships, fire on my command." He paused for a moment, savoring the anticipation. This would be a moment remembered throughout the galaxy. The moment when the Krythox Dominion demonstrated its absolute supremacy. The moment when humanity learned the cost of defiance. Fire. 200 warships opened fire simultaneously. Beams of concentrated energy streaked across the void. Missiles launched in swarms. Plasma torpedoes burned through the darkness like artificial stars. The combined firepower was staggering. It was enough to destroy a small moon. It was enough to level entire cities on a planetary. Surface all of it struck the Prometheus at the same instant. The explosion of light was so bright that the observation deck's windows automatically darkened to protect the viewer's eyes. For several seconds, no one could see anything. Sensors across the station overloaded and reset. Thrax allowed himself a satisfied growl. That is how you handle the windows cleared. The sensors came back online. The Prometheus was still there. It had not moved. It had not been damaged. Its hull showed no marks, no burns, no signs that anything had happened at all. The only change was a faint glow across its surface, like heat slowly dissipating from metal. "That is impossible," whispered the Vellani ambassador. No shield technology could absorb that much energy. But it was not shield technology. The delegates would learn that later. The Prometheus did not use shields. Its hull was made from something entirely different. Something humans had developed in secret over decades of hidden research. Materials that did not block energy, but absorbed it, converted it, stored it for later use. The Krythox fleet had just given the human ship enough power to light a city for a year. Captain Helena Vance's voice came over the communication channel again. She sounded calm, almost friendly. "Thank you for the energy contribution. Our response will be proportional but educational." Thrax barely had time to process those words before the Prometheus fired. It was a single beam of light, bright blue, perfectly focused. It crossed the distance between the human ship and the Krythox flagship in less than a second. When it struck, there was no explosion, no dramatic destruction. Instead, every weapons system on Thrax's flagship went dark. Every engine shut down. Every shield generator failed. The most powerful warship in the Krythox fleet became a lifeless piece of metal floating in the void. The entire process took 1.3 seconds. "Status report," Thrax demanded, his voice suddenly hoarse. "Sir, we have lost all offensive and defensive systems. We have lost propulsion. Life support is functioning on backup power only." The officer's voice was shaking. "Sir, they did not destroy us. They simply turned us off." On the observation deck, Ambassador Tessera of the Fenari had stopped crying. She was staring at the window with wide eyes, barely daring to breathe. Around her, ambassadors from a dozen species watched in stunned silence. Captain Vance spoke again. "Warlord Merchant Thrax, the United Earth Confederation has no desire for conflict. We propose the following. Withdraw your territorial claims against the Fenari systems and enter good faith negotiations regarding legitimate trade agreements. You have 1 hour to respond." A countdown appeared on every display screen in the Krythox fleet and on Station Meridian. 60 minutes. 59 minutes and 59 seconds. 59 minutes and 58 seconds. Thrax stared at the numbers. He stared at his crippled flagship. He stared at the human ship that had just absorbed the full fury of his fleet and responded with a single surgical strike. "How is this possible?" he asked. He was not really speaking to anyone. He was simply unable to comprehend what had just happened. "They are humans. They have been in space for 40 years. We have been a spacefaring civilization for 3,000 years. How can they have technology like this?" No one had an answer for him. Ambassador Marasova stepped forward. Her voice was quiet but clear. "Warlord Merchant Thrax, I suggest you use the next hour wisely."
Captain Vance is a patient woman.
"But the Prometheus was built to solve problems. I would prefer if we could find a solution that does not require her to demonstrate more of its capabilities." Thrax turned to look at her. For the first time since the summit began, he truly saw the human ambassador. Not as a representative of a minor power, not as someone to be dismissed or ignored, but as a threat. "Who are you people?" he asked. Marasova smiled that small, calm smile again. "We are humanity, Warlord Merchant. Den. We have been watching and learning for a very long time." The countdown continued. 57 minutes remained. Their first look at a human warship in every alien vessel immediately halted. Part 4. The hour that followed was unlike anything the galactic community had ever experienced. Diplomatic channels that had been quiet for years suddenly overflowed with frantic messages. Intelligence officers from a dozen species worked desperately to find any information about human military capabilities. They found nothing. Humanity had kept their secrets very well. On Station Meridian's observation deck, Ambassador Yelena Marasova found herself surrounded by delegates who had ignored her for the entire summit. Now they crowded around her, demanding answers to questions they had never thought to ask before. "How did you build that ship?" the Volani ambassador asked. His usual calm composure was completely gone. "Where did the technology come from?" "We built it ourselves," Yelena replied simply. "Over 30 years, in hidden shipyards, using resources. We gathered quietly while everyone else was busy dismissing us as a minor power." "But why?" asked another delegate, a Tyranni with iridescent scales. "Why hide such capability? With power like that, you could have demanded respect. You could have claimed territory, could have built an empire." Yelena looked at the Tyranni for a long moment before answering. "May I tell you a story?" The delegates exchanged confused glances but nodded. 40 years ago, when humanity made first contact with the galactic community, we were full of hope. We thought we were joining a civilization of peace and cooperation. We thought we were entering a golden age. Yelan's voice remained calm, but there was something deeper in her tone now, something old and sad. Then we started paying attention. She turned to look out the window at the Krethax fleet still hanging in the void. We saw the Krethax dominion absorbing smaller species through economic pressure and military threat. We saw the collective ignoring atrocities because intervention was inconvenient. We saw peaceful civilizations like the Fenari living in constant fear, knowing that one day a stronger power would come for them and no one would help. She paused. We recognized the pattern. What pattern? Ambassador Tessera asked quietly. Our own history, Yelen said. Humanity's past is filled with the same stories. Strong nations conquering weak ones. Peaceful peoples destroyed by aggressive empires. Good beings standing by while evil flourished because they lacked the power to stop it. She turned back to face the assembled delegates. We fought terrible wars to learn these lessons. We built monuments to our dead to remind ourselves of the cost of weakness and the cost of aggression. We swore we would do better. She gestured toward the Prometheus. When we joined the galactic community and saw the same patterns repeating on a larger scale, we had a choice. We could accept things as they were. We could become another small, frightened species waiting to be devoured. Or we could prepare. Prepare for what? The Vellani ambassador asked. For the moment when preparation would matter. For the day when we would have to stand up and say no more to a bully who thought they were untouchable. Yelen met his eyes directly. We chose to build something that could protect the innocent. Not to conquer, not to rule, just to protect. You call this protection? The voice came from a Krethax officer who had somehow entered the observation deck. His scales were pale with stress, but his voice was angry. You crippled our flagship. You humiliated our fleet. You expect us to believe this is about protection. Yes, Yelen said calmly. Because if we wanted to destroy your fleet, it would already be gone. The officer went silent. The Prometheus is the first of 12 ships in what we call Project Shepherd, Yelen continued. Each one took decades to build. Each one is capable of what you just witnessed. We built them not as weapons of conquest, but as guarantees, lines that predators cannot cross. Why shepherds? Tessera asked. Yelen smiled gently. Because shepherds do not seek to rule the flock. They do not eat the sheep or sell them to the highest bidder. They stand between the flock and the wolves. That is all they do. That is all we want to do. She looked at the countdown display. 23 minutes remained. Humanity could have built an empire. You are correct about that. With ships like the Prometheus, we could dominate every species in this region of space. We could force everyone to obey our will. Her voice hardened slightly. But we have seen where that road leads. We have walked it ourselves. We have buried millions of our own people in the graves that ambition and cruelty created. We will not become what we swore to prevent. The observation deck was completely silent. Every delegate was staring at the human ambassador, as if seeing her for the first time. So what do you want? The Tyranny ambassador finally asked. If not power, if not territory, what does humanity actually want? Trade Yelen said. Cooperation, friendship, a galaxy where the Fenari can grow their crops in peace. A community where disagreements are solved through negotiation, not intimidation. A future where ships like the Prometheus become obsolete because no one needs protection anymore. She spread her hands. Is that really so hard to understand? Before anyone could respond, Captain Vance's voice came over the communication system again. Ambassador Marsova, we are receiving a transmission from Warlord Merchant Thrax. He wishes to speak with you privately. Yelen nodded. I will take it in the human delegation's communication room. As she walked toward the door, Ambassador Tessera stepped into her path. The small Fenari's eyes were glistening with tears again, but these were different from the tears of 3 days ago. Ambassador Marisova, Tessera said, her voice barely above a whisper. Why? Why did humanity intervene for us? We have nothing to offer. We have no resources you need. We have no strategic value. Why risk confrontation with the Krethax for beings like us? Yelen looked down at the Fenari ambassador. For just a moment, her careful diplomatic mask slipped, and something warm and human showed through. Because you needed help, she said simply. That is enough. That has always been enough. She left the observation deck and walked to meet whatever future was waiting. 12 minutes remained on the countdown there. First look at a human warship, and every alien vessel immediately halted. Part 5. Warlord Merchant Thrax stood alone on the bridge of his crippled flagship. The emergency lights cast red shadows across his scarred face. Round him, screens displayed damage reports that made no sense. His ship was not destroyed. It was not even damaged in the traditional sense. It had simply been turned off, like a child's toy when the power cell dies. In 3,000 years of Krythak's spacefaring history, nothing like this had ever happened. The communication screen in front of him flickered to life. Ambassador Yelena Marisova's face appeared, calm and patient as always. "Warlord Merchant Thrax," she said. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me." Thrax studied her for a long moment.
Nice.
He had spent his entire career reading opponents, finding weaknesses, exploiting fear. In this human woman's eyes, he saw none of the things he was looking for. No fear, no anger, no hidden ambition, just a quiet certainty that he found deeply unsettling. "You have humiliated me in front of the entire galactic community," he said finally. "You have crippled my flagship. You have made the Krythak's dominion appear weak." "That was not our intention," Yelena replied. "We simply needed to demonstrate that the old rules no longer apply. The strong cannot simply take from the weak anymore. Not while humanity is watching. And what gives humanity the right to make such decisions? We have been in space for 40 years. We have ruled these stars for millennia. Rights are not given," Yelena said quietly. "They are taken, or they are earned. We have earned ours through patience, through sacrifice, and through refusing to become what we oppose. What of the Krythaks? Earned through 3,000 years of expansion?" Thrax opened his mouth to answer, but found that he had no words. "Let me ask you something, Warlord Merchant," Yelena continued. "In all your centuries of conquest and domination, how many species have genuinely allied with the Krythaks? Not submitted, not surrendered. Actually chose to stand beside you because they believed in your cause?" The silence stretched long. "None," Thrax finally admitted. "We do not require allies. We require subjects." "And that is why you will eventually fall," Yelena said. "Not today. Perhaps not in your lifetime. But empires built on fear always crumble. The subjects wait for the moment of weakness, and when it comes, they remember every cruelty, every humiliation, every injustice." She leaned forward slightly. "Humanity is offering you something different. We are offering you a chance to change." Thrax laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You expect me to believe that? After what you have done here? We disabled your flagship without destroying it. We could have killed everyone aboard in that first shot. We chose not to. We gave you an hour to make a decision, instead of simply eliminating your fleet." Yelena's voice remained steady. "These were choices. Warlord Merchant. Deliberate choices. We are showing you what restraint looks like because your people have never seen it before." The countdown display showed 3 minutes remaining. "What exactly are you proposing?" Thrax asked. "Withdraw your claim on the Fenari systems. Enter legitimate trade negotiations with them and with us. Begin the process of earning respect instead of demanding submission." Yelena paused. "The Krythaks have strength, resources, and organizational capability that the galaxy needs. You could be builders instead of conquerors, partners instead of masters. It would be harder than what you have been doing. It would take longer, but the results would last." Thrax was silent for a long time. On the screens around him, his officers waited nervously. In the void outside, 200 warships held their positions, weapons ready but not firing. And somewhere in the darkness, the Prometheus waited to see what would happen next. "If I refuse," Thrax asked, "then you will face the consequences of that refusal. Not from revenge or anger, but because protecting the innocent is what we built the Prometheus to do." Yelena's expression did not change. "But I do not think you will refuse. You are a survivor, Warlord Merchant. You would not have risen to your position otherwise. You know when the game has changed?" 1 minute remained. Thrax looked at the human woman on his screen. He thought about his fleet. He thought about his empire. He thought about 3,000 years of Krythak's history. built on a foundation of strength and fear. And he thought about what it might mean to build something different. Stand down, he ordered over his fleet communication channel. All vessels, stand down and hold position. The countdown stopped with 23 seconds remaining. The Krethax Dominion withdraws its claim on the Fenari systems, Thrax announced formally. We request formal discussions regarding alternative arrangements. On Station Meridian's observation deck, delegates from a dozen species watched in stunned disbelief. Several of them began weeping. Others embraced each other. Ambassador Tessera of the Fenari collapsed into a chair, unable to stand as the weight of fear finally lifted from her shoulders. Over the following days, something remarkable happened. The Valanthi Trade Summit transformed from a gathering of frightened species waiting for the next act of aggression into something that resembled actual diplomacy. With the Prometheus watching silently from its position near the station, representatives began having conversations they had avoided for centuries. The Krethax delegation did not become friendly overnight. That would take years, perhaps generations. But they participated. They negotiated. They treated other species as partners rather than prey. And slowly, carefully, the first foundations of a new kind of galactic community began to form. On the final day of the extended summit, Captain Helena Vance of the Prometheus received a message from Ambassador Morisova. What happens now? Vance asked when they spoke privately. Now the real work begins, Yellen replied. We showed them what we can do. We proved that humanity is willing to stand against injustice. But ships and weapons cannot build lasting peace. That requires trust, and trust requires time. Do you think it will work? Do you think the galaxy can actually change? Yellen looked out her window at the stars. Somewhere among them, the Fenari were celebrating their survival. The Cracks were returning home to report a defeat that might become a new beginning. And 11 more ships like the Prometheus waited in hidden dockyards, hoping they would never be needed. I do not know, she admitted. Humanity has tried to change before. Sometimes we succeeded. Sometimes we failed terribly. But we never stopped trying. That is what makes us who we are. The Prometheus began its journey home. As it passed Station Meridian, dozens of vessels from various species altered their courses to fly alongside it briefly. Not in challenge. Not in fear. In something that looked almost like respect, Captain Vance watched them from her. Bridgen smiled. The galaxy had taken its first look at a human warship that day. They had seen the power humanity could bring to bear when innocent lives were threatened. But what they had really witnessed was something far more significant than weapons or technology. They had seen a species that learned from its own dark history. A species that built the strength to dominate but chose to protect instead. A species that believed the universe could be better and was willing to work for that belief. They had seen humanity at its best, and for the first time in a very long time, the galaxy had hope.